Greetings, Anonymous Party members, and greetings to those of you considering joining the movement. Greetings also to the international followers. I know there are several of you, and I hope that something I say can help you in your quest to bring or return freedoms to your own nations. Now, in my first video, I outlined the need for a new party, and I also explained why other new party attempts have failed. I also introduced a new party unlike any other since the birth of our nation, the Anonymous Party. If you didn't watch the first video, or are not familiar with the Anonymous movement, don't worry, I'll explain it a little further later. But I also announced that I, Nick Borden, plan to run for President of the United States on a budget of only a few $100s. For more information, watch any of the other videos on my YouTube channel. There are only maybe 3 so far. But, you can also watch them on my website, www.anonymousparty.org. Or you can like our Facebook page, which will automatically send you updates of new video releases and potentially some other news, if there is any. And the address for that is www.facebook.com/theanonymousparty, all one word. I have received some comments suggesting that I should be a libertarian, but that party has already kind of been labeled a failure by many, and while I concede that it has been gaining ground slowly, at the rate it has been growing, it would take decades before it would be able to put a serious contender on the presidential ballot, if ever. In addition, I still firmly believe that while it has gotten a lot of things right, it still has at least a few things, major things, wrong. It's my firm belief that if the Libertarian Party is truly for freedom and fairness, which I think at least most of them in the movement are, and that they are not just purely seeking power, then they will see the virtues of my plan and hopefully endorse it, and potentially even step out of the way, even if they may wish to voice a few criticisms of some of the particular details in the process. I extend this same invitation to any members of either of the 2 major parties as well. If you truly are for the people, then you will step out of the way when an acceptable anonymous candidate enters a race, and instead you will endorse that candidate and allow the people of this country a chance to run their government. Now, I promised in my second video that I would talk more about myself and how I became the person that I am today. Well, in the course of writing the speeches for this video, I decided to split the 2 topics that I had promised to talk about into 2 videos, and this will either be the second or the third video, but either way, it contains a little bit more about me. So, I'll start with a little bit of family history. I was born in 1980 in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I was raised in a house that my father designed and built. I have 1 brother and 3 sisters. I went to small Christian schools for several years and was homeschooled for 1 year. After that, beginning in the 4th grade, I started going to public school. With the exception of penmanship, calculus, and history, I actually did very well in school. Since school, I have gained a strong interest in history and could probably even teach American history at this point. After high school, I attended Ball State University. Now, Ball State is in Muncie, Indiana, and is, or at least was, it might still be, I don't know, known for being a party school. But I had and still have absolutely no interest in alcohol. Don't get me wrong, though, I'm not anti-alcohol, I'm just not interested. So long as you keep yourself off the road and somewhere safe for everyone else, I really don't care what you do in regards to your recreational drinking. But my wife is the exact same way, just a few years younger. How exactly we found each other is still an unsolved mystery. While I was at Ball State, though, my first major was computer science, which I entered into on the recommendation of my high school guidance counselor. She recommended this when I told her that I was interested in web design, which I'd kind of been fiddling with during my senior year. I accepted her advice without really doing any research myself. Shame on me. and I nearly flunked out of college after one semester. My second semester, I corrected the mistake by attempting to get into their graphic design program instead. Eventually, though, my interests shifted a little bit towards 3D animation, which eventually led to me switching schools, at which point I transferred to the University of St. Francis. The switch, obviously, brought me back to the Fort Wayne area and led me to purchasing my first home, a trailer, that was more than enough space for just myself. It also eventually led to me taking a job working for a major retailer. The day I came in for my interview, I was introduced to a bunch of people, one of whom eventually became my wife. While I was at Ball State, I had enlisted in the Army Reserves. I had completed both basic training and my advanced training before attending St. Francis, and after only 2 semesters was notified that I would be getting deployed to Afghanistan. Again, shortly after I started working for a major retailer and shortly after meeting my wife. In fact, I had only had 2 dates with my wife by the time I was notified that I'd be leaving. The first of which dates was a day that I will never forget. November the 5th, 2003. Despite only having a few dates, we continued to see each other even after I had left for deployment on February the 29th of 2004. I called whenever I could, and when I returned on May 3rd of 2005, we picked up pretty much right where we left off. At the end of June, I proposed to her at Kings Island Theme Park near Cincinnati, Ohio, atop their 1/3 scale replica of the Eiffel Tower that overlooks the park. A very nice place to propose to a young lady if anyone's got the idea. Anyways, we were married the following May. Almost a full year later, we had our first child, a daughter. And just before she turned a year old, I had to leave a second time for another military deployment, this time to Kuwait. While waiting to board a plane at the airport in Fort Wayne, my daughter actually took her first unaided steps just a few short minutes before I had to board the plane. I returned a year later and have since had 2 more boys, both born the first week of November, 2 years apart. Moving on, I grew up in a conservative Christian home, but after my parents divorced at the age of 8, they became a little less conservative, but still largely supported the Republican Party. I followed blindly at first, but as I learned the principles behind the parties, I more enthusiastically supported the Republican Party. I still wasn't really entirely thinking for myself yet, and I wasn't really looking in depth into the workings of the parties. I didn't have a complete grasp on the way government worked, and I still, unfortunately, bought pretty much whatever the media fed me, rarely ever questioning anything. But when I moved into my trailer, after coming back to Fort Wayne, I unconsciously did something that my father had actually been doing for years. I lived entirely without broadcast television. My primary sources of entertainment at the time were the internet and video games. And while I knew that you couldn't really blindly trust everything you read online, because, varying credibility of sources, I soon discovered that the mainstream media was equally as unreliable, if not more so at times, especially when it came to politics, because they always had an agenda to prove. And so, slowly my range of interests grew, to include root issues of the medical field, cancer study, electric cars prior to the Tesla company, welfare, charity organizations, and many other topics. Also, during this time, I first truly started thinking about religious topics, and instead of just swallowing everything I had been taught, the vast majority of which, being taught by my father, was fortunately correct, I finally began questioning it and attempting to figure out how it all fit together rather than just assuming that it did. During much of this time, I almost never actually went to church, though. There were 2 good reasons for this, or 2 main reasons for this. The first was that I was, and really always have been, a night person, and waking up early on Sunday morning to go to church was kind of a huge hassle. The reason it isn't, or that reason isn't really a good excuse, but it was the sole reason at least more than once, I have to admit. The second, but significantly more important reason was that I was never really excited to go to church. I tried a lot of churches, and they all taught pretty much the same worthless garbage. Same old, this is a sin, That's a sin. You're not supposed to sin. Jesus didn't sin, so neither should you. That stuff doesn't really help anybody. Pastors who do sermons telling people what's sinning might as well just be reminding people that they need to eat healthy. We all know what's healthy to eat. It's our stomachs craving food that isn't healthy that drives us to eat that way. The same is true of sinning. Our cravings and convenience are the two biggest motivators in getting us to sin. But how do you fix that? Not by being reminded what's healthy. You have to be given a reason and shown how these foods can be healthy. You also have to be shown what foods are tasty and healthy, because nothing's going to lure you away from the bacon if it tastes like pureed leaves. But the same is true for sin. You don't overcome sin by being reminded that it is sin and that you shouldn't do it, but by being taught what harm that sin does, and by being fed lessons that make you crave the good things in life rather than in sin. This is provided by sound Bible doctrine, and when you're feeding your soul sound Bible doctrine, sin won't get nearly as many opportunities to tempt you. For those of you who are not religious, you might not completely understand this. So, to help you relate, this is about the equivalent of no longer liking a type of TV show or video game because you start craving something with a little more intellectual difficulty. You may not always be in the mood for intellectual stimulation, but when you are, Honey Boo Boo just isn't going to satisfy. You're going to want something more like Firefly or Sliders or maybe Doctor Who or Mythbusters. Continuing on, though, my development of my religious beliefs was the cornerstone of what my politics is built on. Now, you don't have to be religious to have virtue and to understand politics, but I do think that it helps. When you take a very close look at the Bible, you'll notice that God has plans, but people always have a choice of whether or not they want to go along with those plans. They always have at least two choices. At least one choice will glorify God. The other either glorifies that person themselves, or at the very least ignores God. Now, I also noticed that context plays a very important role in determining the meaning or application of a particular statement in the Bible. For example, anytime anyone ever refers to the book of Leviticus to point out that the Bible commands that homosexuals be stoned to death is completely ignoring the context of that statement. And really the entire chapter of Leviticus, or entire book of Leviticus. Leviticus contains a large collection of laws on how a nation with an established religion of Judaism was supposed to behave. This was for the nation of Israel only. In order that their nation be pure in the eyes of God, they had to purge themselves of all intentionally corrupt or sinful people. And within the nation of Israel, everyone believed in God, the same God, and being a homosexual or doing any other sin intentionally was seen as a person thumbing their nose at God, and this was not to be tolerated in a nation with an established religion. This is far different from how Christians should treat homosexuals outside of such a nation. For that example, we need look at the New Testament. Jesus. He often hung out with prostitutes and homosexuals, thieves, and many other types of people who were labeled as undesirables. Why? Because in his eyes they were sick and needed a cure. Sin is a symptom, not the evil in itself. So sinners are sick and need a cure, and Jesus was that cure, and his message and his purpose were that cure. That's why he hung out with them, was to spread that message. There is, however, one more subtle importance in the story of Jesus. He never, not once, chased down any such person labeled as an undesirable to tell them that they were sinning. He shared his knowledge and love with all who were willing to listen to it. That's how it's done. They knew him because of his love and compassion, not because of his accusations and harassments. And that's a very important point in the Bible. You're never going to convert anyone who doesn't want to listen. Leave them alone. So, any church or so-called Christian that takes to the streets to shout at, insult, or otherwise inform sinners of their sinfulness are missing the point of Jesus' message entirely. There are two signs that should tell the world that you are a Christian, and none of them are handheld. They are not picket signs, and they are not bullhorns. They are love and inner peace. A love for your fellow man that makes you hope for their conversion to Christianity, but never nag them about it. And a peace within yourself that comes from trusting the Lord to provide what needs providing, and that whatever is not provided is somehow to benefit you as a lesson learned. All of the suffering and turmoil that I have experienced in my life has in some way prepared me for this campaign. Looking back, I cannot see any significant event in my life that did not in some way force me to learn something useful for this campaign. And so with this foundation, and all of my experiences, I found much of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights very easy to understand. It was simple to deduce why the Founding Fathers said what they said, which is just as important as what they said. But it wasn't until last summer, while listening to Rush Limbaugh, actually the very first broadcast of his that I ever even really listened to, he suggested that everyone read aloud the Declaration of Independence to celebrate Independence Day. Now, I don't really follow Rush Limbaugh all that closely. I listened to a few of his broadcasts since, but I don't really follow him all that closely. But I did think that this was one of the best ideas that I had ever heard, regardless of who had it. And while I had read it years before in high school, I never really read it trying to understand the Declaration. I didn't have the base from which to fully comprehend it yet. And so when I read it again last summer, it made me realize just how many of the issues that our Founding Fathers were complaining about that are in some way present in our current government. It also got me thinking about the other documents, and after reading those, I came to the conclusion that neither party was acting in the spirit of the Constitution. Now, what do I mean by the spirit of the Constitution? Now, the Constitution allows for amendments to be made to it, and I do think that that is a good thing. That is a strength of the Constitution. However, when certain things are put into the Constitution to protect something, an amendment that removes that protection or circumvents that protection in some way is not in the spirit of the Constitution. A document that is designed to give freedom, an amendment that takes freedom away, is not in the spirit of that original document. So, conservatism, while holding to Christian values, doesn't always hold to fairness in government, and doesn't hold to the spirit of the Constitution at all times. Having government impose Christian values is just as much of a problem as having government prevent the practice of religion. So you have to take a step back and look only for what values of Christianity are necessary for maintaining order in society, and which ones are merely values of the Church and of God. You can't legislate religion. You can't force religion on others, but you shouldn't either have laws that prevent religion from being practiced. And we actually have a lot of both going on right now, and they all need to be removed. But this is why the Founding Fathers listed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's also a very specific reason why they put them in the order that they have. It's an indispensable blueprint for determining whether a law is fair or even necessary. A person's right to life should never be taken from them unless they have demonstrated their disregard for another's right to life by taking a life, or at least by attempting to take a life, or by treasonous actions which would naturally lead to the deaths of many. A law denying a person's right to liberty may only be made if necessary to protect another's right to life, since that right supersedes the right to liberty. The same goes for pursuit of happiness. If a person's happiness is dependent on killing people or enslaving them, then laws preventing him from pursuing his happiness in those manners are acceptable, because they're protecting other people's more important rights to life and liberty. Now, falling under pursuit of happiness and liberty are rights to property. Happiness is hard to have if you can't keep your property. No one should be able to steal it. One of the fundamental issues with all of this, though, is your ability to protect your rights. All of them. If someone decides that they want to deprive you of your property, your happiness, your liberty, or your life, you should have every right to protect those rights by fighting that person however necessary to protect your rights. Whoever is trying to deprive you of these rights has obviously demonstrated that they do not value these rights, since they're not willing to respect them in others. Therefore, they are not worthy of having those rights. This is why they said that you are endowed by your Creator, but they intentionally failed to mention who or what that Creator was. The reason is because if it were your government that granted you these rights, then your government could take them away. And only they could take them away. So if you are endowed by something outside of the government, then you should also be allowed to protect them, without having to consult that government first. This means that the police are not responsible for your safety. They are not responsible for protecting you, unless they just happen to be there when protection is needed. People should be allowed to protect themselves. Not only should they be allowed, but they should be able to protect themselves. The last point I'd like to address is a question I've been asked a few times. Why anonymous? Why name the party after, or even associate it with, a group of cyber terrorists? Well, to that I have a few simple answers. First of all, Anonymous isn't exactly a group. It's a movement. An idea that freedom transcends government. That privacy, liberty, and fairness are not a government's to grant or to deny to their citizens. And while some members of Anonymous do resort to undesirable means to achieve their ends, they do not speak for the entire collective movement. I had nothing to do with any portion of the Anonymous movement prior to this campaign. I've never hacked anything. I haven't been to any of the protests or marches, although I did kind of want to go to the Million Mask March on November the 5th, but due to work and travel expenses, I couldn't really go. I never actually even heard about Anonymous until June of 2012. But after watching a bunch of the videos, I very quickly became intrigued and began researching a lot of various topics. And while I didn't agree with every video that I watched under the banner of Anonymous, it became apparent that many different people, or groups at least, were making these videos, and that I agreed more with some than others, but the overall themes, they made perfect sense. The second reason that I chose Anonymous is because while there are some unlawful behaviors, it is the movement's disregard for unfair law that puts them on the same basic plane as the men who participated in the Boston Tea Party. Instead of disguising themselves as Indians, however, they donned the Guy Fawkes mask. Really, though, the only reservation that I had about the whole thing is a line that they use in the closing of their videos. In most of them, it goes, "We are Legion." Now, in a few videos, though, it is slightly altered to "We are a Legion." I do like this much better, but it's by far not the most popular. Most of the videos contain just the phrase "We are Legion." But the main problem with it is its obvious connection to the New Testament story where Jesus casts demons out of a man. The demons say, "I am Legion, for we are many." The term Legion actually means many, and so the line as used by Anonymous is merely stating that as a means to demonstrate that they aren't merely some small group of nerds in a basement somewhere hacking and making YouTube videos. And as used, it is accurate. We are many, but the unfortunate parallel to the collective of demons that Jesus cast out doesn't really help out. And so I would like to request that for any of them listening, that they change, or at least begin using, the phrase, "we are a legion," for two reasons. The first of which is to avoid the negative comparison that leads some to believe that we are a demonic movement. Because not all of those in the movement are Christians, probably not a majority. Few, if any, are actual Satanists. The second reason, though, is that legion, as it is being used, simply means many. And while that is accurate, changing it to a legion changes the context then to claim that Anonymous is a large army, or at least a large section of fighting men, a mighty fighting force. And while its weapons may not be swords, guns, tanks, or bombs, Anonymous is not a force to be ignored. Anonymous is a powerful army, and our weapons are truth, enlightenment, and creating government transparency, even when the governments don't want to be transparent. And so I figured the best way to accomplish the goals of government transparency, liberty, privacy, truth, and fairness would be to create a system in which those who value these things can rise above those in power and restore freedoms to their fellow man. And by requiring that they return to the people after serving in an elected office, we can ensure that they implement only laws that will benefit all of their fellow people. My last message is that I do not wish to control the Anonymous movement. In fact, I wish to remain separate, but still hoping for the support of the movement. I hope that those who wish to remain anonymous without participating in government would serve as watchdogs and point out any and all corruption of any candidate in any party, including this one, and preferably point it out quickly to the person who is improperly serving, so that they can at least have the opportunity to correct themselves before being shamed entirely. Hopefully that doesn't happen much, though. But there is a code involved with living anonymously, and that is to value truth, fairness, and liberty, and to shun corruption, greed, and coercion. Our founding fathers had much in common with the basic tenets of the Anonymous movement. So much that in many respects, I see Anonymous as being the Boston Tea Party of the modern age. They aren't the only crusaders for good out there. They're just the ones with the most powerful symbolism and the biggest online presence. So if you are crusading for freedom, truth, and fairness, make your voice heard. Join the Anonymous Party, because to us, your opinions matter. Because you matter. We all matter, because we are the people. We are anonymous. We are a legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us.